Tracey Baumann is a swim coach and co-founder of SwimMastery. She's also authored and written a book called The SwimMastery Way. On today's episode, I've got Tracy on here to talk about some of the things that she's mentioned and written about in her book that can help you become a faster and more efficient swimmer. I think she's got some really good insights and cues and takes on different parts of the stroke. And I think for anyone who is an adult who maybe didn't learn to swim as a child, that there's some very good takeaways from this podcast. Even if you did learn to swim as a kid, I know that you're going to learn a lot from this episode that I did with Tracey Baumann. Let's get into it. In terms of someone who is looking to get into the pool, often one of those things is there's a lot of fear of either open water or just being in the water and not getting tired. Like there's that first element they need to get over. And I'm sure you've dealt with this a lot with people, is how does someone go from being short of breath and being fearful and panicking to then just being someone who gets comfortable in the water? What are some of those barriers that they need to overcome, and then how can they approach it, and what causes them to tire so quickly and become panicked?
So, yeah, lots of great questions in there. And I think it all comes down to the fact that we are terrestrial mammals, the fact that we are actually not designed to be in water. We're not designed to survive in water. So before we even start, we have that natural survival instinct that's saying, get me out of here. And, all the bells and whistles are singing and the alarm bells are saying, what are you doing? So there's an element of having to calm that natural instinct to not put your face in water to begin with. And I like to really use what we call air exchange breath management as a way to really start working with people. And it literally doesn't matter who comes to me. I tend to work with air management with everyone first. So really teaching people about how to breathe with the diaphragm, not taking thoracic breaths, making sure that the breaths are quiet and calm, exhaling out through the nose, and just teaching them air exchange mechanics really serves two purposes. One, it calms their breathing and gets them having that better exchange of the gaseous exchange in the lungs. But what it also does is it calms the nervous system. And once you can calm the nervous system, then you can start really working with the client, because until that point, they're shut down and not listening. So once we've got to that point, then we would start working on the actual stroke skills that will be needed for getting them in. But I often find that once they've started working on the air management, that they start to feel so much more comfortable in the water right from the get-go.
Yeah, it's such a fundamental thing to get right. And even sometimes with people, we'll get them to just practice their floating to start with, where we might get them to float in a ball, and we get them to take a big breath in and then tuck into a ball and just see how they float in the water. But occasionally I'll get swimmers who we want them to take a big breath in, but they only take a very shallow breath in, and then they're almost sinking in the water. Whereas everyone, if they're taking a deep enough breath, they get enough air in, they're going to float. But to me, that just shows that they're breathing very shallow. They're using their upper lungs. They're not filling up, using their diaphragm, and that in itself, you can kind of see those faults that they've already got established there.
Yeah, and the difference is as well is in the body position when you're taking the air into the thoracic cavity, so into the upper lungs, the whole weight distribution, and the center of mass is different because the air's higher up, so there's more weight behind it. So the whole way that the swimmer actually sits in the water changes depending on whether they're taking a diaphragmatic or a thoracic breath. So actually taking that diaphragmatic breath gives them a better body position in the water, as well as all the other benefits. There's just so many benefits, and also it puts the ribcage into a better position for the scapulae to work with the arm mechanics and stuff. So there's so many things that just a simple intake of air can actually do. I could talk for hours about it. It's very exciting.
Well, just on that topic, so once you teach them how to breathe using their diaphragm, one of the challenges that we then have is when someone's swimming normally, they don't have the same amount of time to breathe, like if we were just kind of slowly breathing in, breathing out on land. So how do you then make that transition from teaching them to breathe using their diaphragm to then having them swim and breathe in a similar way, because it's all happening a lot quicker when we're swimming?
Yeah, it's another really great question. I think that the important thing is to help the swimmers to realize how little they need to inhale. You typically, I don't know, you've probably experienced this so many times in your career, where you can hear people breathing, so you can hear them go and they take that really big deep, what they perceive to be deep, which actually means thoracic and actually high in the chest breath, and they overfill. And I say to people, when you take that deep breath, actually all anyone ever wants to do after that is just let it out. Whereas if we explain to the swimmers that they're taking much less air than they think they need, because as you just said, they are doing it more often, then they can just take that really quick diaphragmatic inhale that's really quiet, and then they, as soon as they put their face in the water, they start to exhale out through the nose, and then as they go for the air, they do a bigger exhale just before they inhale, so that they have that circulation of air happening, and they don't kind of get filled up and then get to the end of 50 meters and go, oh, I need to just stop and get rid of all this carbon dioxide. So it's really important that they learn the cycle of inhale, pop, 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 we call it, just like just a bubble, bubble, bubble out, and then exhale. And then the inhale almost just happens. The diaphragm creates a vacuum, and they just, as soon as you exhale, the diaphragm will just almost suck the air in for them. And it's the amount of air that they take in that actually makes them be able to do it for, across the channel, for example, and not just be able to do it for 50 meters.
And then in terms of how often someone should breathe, what's your perspective there? Should people be breathing 2, 3s, more than that? And what's appropriate for different situations?
Yeah, so it's a question that we get a lot. I'm sure you get it a lot. I get it a lot. Everybody wants to know, how often shall we breathe? The reality around it is a lot of the answer is going to depend on tempo. So the slower someone is, the slower tempo someone is swimming, obviously the more often we're going to want them to breathe. But if you look, and I've said for years, my advice has always been breathe every 2, but breathe every 2 equally on both sides. So, I always say to my swimmers, pick a breathing wall and always just breathe to that wall. So, you're practicing both sides equally. You're getting air every second stroke. And it's been really fascinating to watch the elite swimmers over the years. So we've been saying this probably since, 2010. And now we look at the elite swimmers, and it went through a period where just the men, the elite men, the Olympians, were breathing every 2. But quite a few of the women were still breathing every 3. And now, I said I went to the Brisbane trials a couple of weeks ago, and pretty much, and there's always anomalies and people outside the box, obviously, but pretty much across the whole afternoon that I was there, every single one of them were breathing pretty much every 2. So I always say, if they're breathing every 2, there must be a really good reason to breathe every 2. And the reality around it is the difference between breathing every 2 and every 3 is something between, you get 13 breaths per minute breathing every 3, and somewhere over 20 breaths per minute breathing every 2. And our muscles need oxygen to work. So we just kind of do the maths around it, and we want to give our muscles what they need, and we want to stay oxygenated, and we want to keep that going. So I always suggest breathe every 2, but equally to both sides. So I never condone just learning one side, because obviously they create an asymmetry in the stroke. What do you suggest?
Very, very similar. Very similar. I mean, there's just such a hesitation for a lot of people to breathe every 2, because they have learnt somewhere that that's wrong, and and it's just breathing too much. But I mean, I think of my own swimming personally, like if I can breathe every 3 or maybe every 4 if I'm going at 70% or lower. I've got to be going pretty comfortable to hold it. But anything above that, I'm going to really struggle to hold that over longer distances. And and so it's just breathing every 2. There's nothing wrong with it. And you can even mix it up. Like you can mix it up within a lap. You can mix it up within a session if you want to. And so if you're in a 50-meter pool, I don't mind if you go maybe every 2 off the wall. Then maybe you do a couple 3s if you want. Then you can go back to 2 as you go into the wall, and then hit your turn and repeat. But the turn takes a bit out of you, so you do often need to have that too. And you look at some of the 400, 800, 1500 meter swimmers, they will breathe, they'll go left, right,
they'll go
into the wall.
Right.
Into the wall.
Yeah.
And even sometimes off it as well.
Turn. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
yeah.
and I think the women's 400 short course record. I think it's a Chinese swimmer. She was breathing I think the last 3 strokes into the wall, and then maybe even the first 2 strokes off the wall. So
Everyone. Yeah.
yeah.
Just
So
goes to show, right, that we need oxygen. And I think the fear around it is that a lot of people are learning freestyle technique, and we're focusing on freestyle here, and they learn great freestyle technique, but their breathing always gets in the way, so they try and avoid it because they want to stay streamlined. It slows them down. They don't like it. It doesn't feel great. And my advice to everyone is the more you practice doing it, the less uncomfortable it's going to feel. So do it more, not less. And make your breath fit into your stroke. So there's no difference between your freestyle stroke with breathing or without breathing. And then you can breathe as many times as you need, because it doesn't interrupt your rhythm, your stroke, your technique, your pattern, and so on.
Yeah, very true. There's only so far you can swim before you're going to have to need to breathe regularly. So yeah, if you're breathing stuffing up your stroke at the moment, then just if you can figure out why that is, and then trying to make it so your breathing just fits in with it, like you mentioned, then long term that's a much better plan than trying to avoid it. I do like, and I think I was reading this in your book, is it can be good to, if you're doing 25s, for example, maybe you push off the wall and you do your first 6 strokes or 7 strokes where you're not breathing, just so you can focus on your technique. And that's why we use snorkel occasionally, just to be able to focus on the stroke and take the breathing out of it. So there's times where it is appropriate to breathe less, but just in a general sense, I think every 2 is the way to go for most people. Now, in terms of body positions, obviously a big one, and the next thing we want to go on to there, and just learning how to hold the body and how to let the water support the body as well. So what sort of things or cues do you find are really useful for helping someone learn how to use the water to support them?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest hurdle for swimmers is our human body makeup. It's a massive hurdle for freestyle swimming, because we have such a big hinge at the hip area, and we're horizontal, and we're lying on our gravity, and it's pulling us down, and everyone's fighting to keep those legs up behind them. So what they typically do is they'll pop on a pool boy or a buoyancy shorts, and they'll keep the legs up that way. And obviously when they then come to do their race or their event, they can't have them, and it becomes a little bit of a battle of wills. So what we try and do is we try and teach them how to connect their legs to their torso, so that they have one long vessel rather than a vessel that breaks in half. So I equate it to sort of like Lego pieces. So they have a Lego piece for their legs and a Lego piece for their torso, and then we find the connecting piece so that everything works as one. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that the pelvis is in the right position. So I talk a lot about bones, and I never talk about muscles. I talk about putting bones and joints into the correct position, and the muscles are attached to the bones. So it's great when you move the bone, all the muscles around it are going to do their thing, and we'll get more muscles hopefully involved because they're all attached. So what we want to do is we want to create length through the body. So I work a lot with analogy. So a lot of my cues are getting people to think about doing something and moving bones and joints into certain directions to create connections. So my favorite cue, I think, that I use to do this is I get them to imagine that they've got a book on their head to set the correct head position, and then I have them just imagine that they are taking that book away from their feet and sort of getting air in between each one of their vertebrae, in between their hip bones and stuff, and just really putting space between that. And what they tend to find is that all the muscles around the core area, recognizing that the core is all the way around and huge, it's not just made up of abs, which many people think. And that then sets this beautiful long sort of head to feet line that then allows the water to support it, because it's one unit rather than lots of moving parts. And obviously the moving parts get in the way, and the one unit just sits beautifully in the water. And then you add the breath into the right place within that unit, and you have a much better idea of balance. And then obviously we go on from there. So that's where we start.
And then as you're introducing the kick, after you've sort of introduced that body position, how they hold it, What are some cues or things that you've learned along your years of coaching on maybe how not to teach it, or good ways to explain it to get people to kick effectively and have that flutter, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, so the first thing I do is I call it a flutter, because we want the swimmer to tap into the hip flexors, the glutes, the abs, the obliques, all of those muscles, rather than just their quads and hamstrings. As soon as they tap into quads and hamstrings and they're trying to think about moving their feet, then that's going to anterior tilt the pelvis and they're going to collapse and lose their legs. So we talk about using the flutter. And I talk to them about imagining that their whole leg is one unit, and that they want to flutter with the whole unit. So I get them to really focus on moving the thigh bones. I just keep language simple. I mean, we could go into all the actual names of bones and stuff, but I want people to know what we're talking about. So I just say move the thighs behind the body line, front of the body line at quite a quick tempo. And what happens is it then uses the bigger muscle groups, and it helps them to use the whole leg for their flutter rather than bending at the knee. And that helps them keep that length in the hip flexor and the connection to the torso while they're doing the flutter.
Good. So you're talking about where you're getting them to use that upper part of their leg, and then if they just go back and forth from the pelvis, then that's naturally going to create that bit of a flutter, as opposed to maybe thinking
Correct.
about the feet. So you're starting at that point closer to the middle of the body, really.
To the middle of the body. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And then with rotation, trying to get someone to maintain that position, but doing it as they're going side to side. What sort of things are you seeing people want to do that might be causing them to either rotate too far or lose their position? And then how do you sort of bring them back and get them to hold that position as they go left to right?
Yeah, so it's such an interesting question. Like I did a Mastery Monday, and we do every Monday, we do a Mastery Monday. I did Mastery Monday this week on the streamline position. And I think that the first question I ask everybody is, where do they think they should be rotating to? And often when I say to someone, so I'll say to my students or something, I say to them, if I were to put you on the floor in your streamlined position, in your rotated position, what parts of your body are going to be making contact with the floor? And 99 times out of 100, they show me the side of their body. 9 times out of 100. So already I'm now inside their brain, knowing that every single stroke they do, they're going to end up on their side over rotated. So the first thing that I do is I have to change what their brain thinks they should be doing versus what we need them to be doing, because we don't want to go up on our side, because A, it takes too long, and B, when I go up on my side, I'm just going to sink like a knife through butter. So we want to get the rotational angle by talking to the brain about how far we should go. So we talk about what parts of the body are going to actually make contact with the ground when I'm in my rotated position, and it changes the whole way they think about it. Because as soon as they over rotate, everything goes. As the legs will go, we will never get, if you're over rotated, you can never get a catch. So really having that honed in, and that amount of rotation honed in, will really, really help the swimmers maintain that connected long body position. And then the flutter just becomes something that just fits into it and is a diagonal movement, depending on whether they're in their left streamline or their right streamline. They're always fluttering in the same direction as the rest of the body.
Great. That's a great way of doing it. And where I guess you'd see someone, if they were lying on the floor on their side with the correct rotation, is it's kind of through the front here.
Correct.
Right? Like it's not on the very edge of their
pecs, front of hip bone, front side of thigh. Yeah.
And then and the way I sort of see that working for people is that whenever we do a side kick drill, sometimes we'll use like a little encore kickboard, just a mini kickboard, put the hand on top just to press down there. And the swimmers that hold that position really well, they've got their opposite shoulder out of the water, and those would be the contact points. And the other two sides of that is people will either be very flat and there's no rotation and they think they're rotating, and then the other people are just twisted on their side and they're way too far. And usually because we do the analysis first, we'll see them. Usually how they swim is how they're going to do this side kick drill. And and so my suggestion to them is, all right, Yeah, exactly. And if you can make this change in the drill and get the feel for what you need to be doing here, that's probably going to be the first step at actually making changes to your swim stroke. So just be aware that any things that aren't ideal in your video, that's going to come out in the drill. So just be mindful of that and see if you can get into that better position when we do these drills.
I think a really good thing about Streamline as well is what's happening to the head position. Because as soon as you over rotate, you cannot maintain what I call the non-negotiable hull of your boat, if you like, middle prong of your trident, whatever you want to call it. But as soon as you over rotate, the head will go offline. And if that head is offline, then the swimmer is not going to swim in a straight line. It's physically impossible. So it's another good sort of indicator or feedback loop is my head, am I having to strain to still see the bottom of the pool, or is my head going offline or one side or the other?
So now going through the catch, a lot of coaches will explain things differently, use different analogies. What are some ones that you found to be really useful and helpful for then explaining that part of the stroke?
Yeah, it's always the first question. How many people have come to you and they've said, oh, do you know what? I've got this swimming thing. I can swim, I'm really good at that. But what I really want to know about is how to catch. And you're like, yeah, I'm not going to tell you that just yet because we need to build up the middle first in order for the extremities to work. And what's so exciting, and I was talking about it just this morning, I'm in the middle of running an advanced coach training course for some coaches. And I was talking to them today, and I was talking to them about the progression of catch and how we teach it. And I said, I can't even remember the last time that I ever used this progression because I don't need to. Because when you set up the middle and you work from the middle out and you put the joints into the correct position and you allow the joints to move and you give the correct cues and you give direction of energy and momentum, then what happens is the body taps into its natural ability to catch and hold. If I put my body into a correct streamline position and then I want to think about holding, it's going to create the position as a byproduct of setting up the correct joint mechanics. So it's a really tricky question for me to answer because I often don't teach it because it often just happens. So what I often do is I tap into getting people to feel the water and feel sensation so they can tap into their natural joint mechanics more. But that only works if I've set up the streamline position and the middle trident position correctly first. If I was to teach it kind of step by step, like I was talking to the coaches about this morning on the coach training course, I'm going to get them into their streamline position. I'm going to get them really connected with their scaps, and I'm going to teach them how to fold and imagine, folding and holding on a rung of a ladder or over a ball or a concrete slab or something, and teach the swimmer about the fact that the catching side is stationary and that the body's going to move past it, and that they're never bringing this back ever. They're just holding on and moving along and holding on and moving along and so on and so on and so on. So that tends to be how I tackle catch.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. So one thing you mentioned was the fold and hold. So I think reading that in your book, that's a good way to think about what needs to happen at the elbow, because really common thing is people lock the elbow out and they're very straight through that part of the stroke, and they just don't end up holding much water at all when they do that. So folding the elbow, and then the hold part is, we're not looking to muscle to pull our hand through the water. We need to hold it and think about that anchoring and just moving the body past it. And I think that's a good reminder, either a good reminder for people or a good thing for them to know that what's moving forwards is your body. But with the ideal catch, your arm is not going to move. Now it's obviously going to move, but we don't want it to. That's what we're working towards, is just having it stay in that same position. So getting as little slippage through the water as possible. And then I think that takes a lot of the pressure off people trying to pull themselves through. And if they relax more, then they can hold a better position.
Hold more, yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise, if they're trying to be too forceful with that first part of the stroke, they end up compromising their position, because you just don't move as well if you're tense and muscling it.
Correct. Yeah. And the synchronization goes. So then it just throws the whole stroke out. And the next stroke, then they limp. They end up limping when they try and pull themselves along. Like I call it limping.
And what about having people tune into either the sound of their swimming or how they feel in the water? Because I think building up that body awareness for people can go a really long way, but it's just something that there's a lot of sensations happening when you're new to swimming, and so it's not easy to do that. But what's your guidance for a lot of people in terms of developing that feel and the body awareness and those sorts of things?
Yeah. So I personally believe it's the only way that someone can continue to improve their swimming is if they can really tune into that proprioception, that ability to know where they are in time and space in the water, and to be able to feel both the inside of their body and the outside, and the effect that the elements, whether it's the air or the water, is having on their skin. And the better they can become at that, the better they can become as a swimmer, because they have more control, because they have more awareness. So I start building that awareness. We do the same drill that you do with the breathing, and right from that position there, I'm getting them to tune into. So when I get them to take in a nice diaphragmatic breath and they float in the ball, I get them to start. One of the things I'll get them to do is start to feel where they can feel the water on their back and where they can feel air on their back. And then I get them to just bubble out and just get them to feel what changes, what's cold and wet, what's warm and dry, cold and dry and warm and wet. And that starts to really build in the awareness of tapping into the elements. And then when we start doing some of the cues, like send your head away from your feet, I'll get them to tune into different parts of their body and tell me how it feels different. And if they can't tell me how it feels different, then what I'll get them to do is I'll get them to do it how they did it before. So, i.e., let's say, like you were saying, trying to keep their bum up and they anterior tilt their pelvis, and then I get them to send their head away from their feet, and then they get the contrast between the two feelings.
Another good cue that you used was in the book about, I think you called it opening the gate for the recovery. So something that's very common that I see is we have this thought of a high elbow recovery, and quite often that means when people come out of the water, they bring their arm out very high, right alongside the body, and in this really awkward and uncomfortable position for the shoulder. And then it kind of stuffs them up over the top of the water, and it makes it hard to then keep their balance and keep their trident, as you'd say, and it can really throw a lot of things out. And like generally I would be thinking, well, the recovery doesn't matter that much, but if it's ruining other parts of the stroke and causing you to lose your alignment, then it does matter. So it matters to a certain extent. So could you talk a little bit about that recovery and that cue and how you teach how you should come over the top of the water?
Yeah, so I could speak for hours on recovery, because I think that it's probably one of the most important parts of the stroke. Because when we think about just from the physics point of view, as soon as we take any body part out of the water, it instantly becomes 10 times heavier than it just was in the water. So we can then understand why the recovery has such a huge effect on the body position under the water, because we're in an unstable environment. We're on an unstable medium. So if I lift something up here and I'm on an unstable medium here, then there's going to be a whole lot of stabilizing going on under the water to counterbalance whatever I'm doing with my arm above the water. So it makes it then really important to make sure what's happening above the water is going according to plan, so that I don't have to stabilize under the water, because I always will. It's Newton's third law of motion, right? So it's really, really important, from a shoulder safety point of view, which, is probably one of the things that I'm not just shoulder safety, but injury prevention per se. Like, it's very attached to making sure that swimmers are swimming safely and they aren't putting themselves into compromising positions that they could get injured from. But also from a physics point of view, that they have to create this arm recovery that's wide and safe, so that they're working within the frontal plane of the shoulder, and they keep that shoulder joint really safe, and they can tap into larger muscle groups. As soon as they take it behind them, the shoulder joint gets stuck in the shoulder girdle, and then they have to do some kind of weird thing to clear it, to get the the hand forwards. So it's always an interesting thing, because we hear a lot about people wanting to create a high elbow arm recovery. The reality around it is, when we create a correct arm recovery, it should just be a dead straight line from this shoulder to this elbow. The thing that's making it look like it's a high elbow recovery is my rotation. But actually, the arm recovery is just a straight line. So having them think about, one of the cues we use, open the gate, is really having them think about taking the inside of the elbow out away from the rib cage, so that they can keep this joint safe, but also so they can use the arm recovery a bit like a stabilizer wheel on a bicycle, because it's happening low and wide, and that then creates less need for stability in this unstable medium in your streamline side. So that's kind of the thought. And then we can maintain the middle and left trident, if you like, while we are opening the gate or recovering this arm on this side. As well as that, we're also shifting weight and sending weight in the direction of travel. So it gives us kind of free speed and helps us tap into that, rather than sending weight behind us, which obviously is then going to upset that center of mass as well.
That's good. I've used some similar sort of cues. I talk about. I have called it an open recovery compared to a closed recovery, where we're thinking like closed armpit.
Yeah.
We need open arm or underarms
Really
over the water.
nice.
We need open underarms under the water at the front as well. And in terms of the momentum that you get over the water, your arm weighs, I don't know, a couple of kilos, and then when you're swinging it around over the top, you can really get good momentum over the water and carry that through. It's that free speed. And when you see someone who's not getting it, who throwing themselves off balance and they're coming way behind their body, like, you really notice it, and it does impact how well they flow in the water. So it is. If you get it right, you notice a big difference. And I've tried to turn that thought of a high elbow recovery into like the point that's high. It's like, I think if the elbow is pointing mostly to the sky as you come through in that middle part, okay, that's what I'd think of as a classic high elbow recovery.